The eulogist tells us that his father was a carpenter. I therefore ask and say, indeed, that of all the houses that carpenter must have built, he certainly built an outstanding house of self-esteem within this boy, within this man, within this complete man who faced off against a prime minister and a deputy prime minister on the day. The eulogist tells us that his mother was an agricultural worker, and of all the seeds that she must have planted, this was the most fertile seed of ambition planted within the mind of this 30-year-old child who became a man. And he defended his thesis. And so well did he defend his thesis that he left that meeting with the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, having convinced them that he was equipped to occupy the highest office in this country. Midday. I pause to remind you, sir, that the 3 W's beat England, having learned their cricket entirely in Barbados. I invite you to discover the fact that Owen Arthur became that complete moral and intellectual being, having completed his entire education in Barbados and in the Caribbean. Sir Everton Weekes became the world's best batsman, and he did not need to go to Australia to learn how to bat. He learned how to bat right here at Kensington on both sides of the wall of Kensington. That is the worth of this country. That is the worth of this country's people. We have great self-worth. Sometimes all we need is the opportunity. And Owen Arthur was given the opportunity and never wasted it. I remember well 1984. Tom Adams probably incurred the wrath of some of his party members when he predicted that Owen Arthur would become a prime minister in this country. In a private conversation with Owen Arthur, he remarked to me without saying more that Sir Harold St. John was the most outstanding Barbadian he had ever met. A man who had a depth of appreciation for merit. Merit, Your Honor. And here emerges this young man from this meeting at midday. And permit me to be metaphorical, that for the next 3 hours between 12 and 3, and permit me to be realistic, that for the next 3 terms, this young man leads Barbados and leads the Barbadian economy to unprecedented economic prosperity. Barbados had never been as prosperous as it was when Owen Arthur was Prime Minister of this country. That is merit. That is performance. But he didn't do it alone. He did it with his generation. And that generation, Your Honor, thrived on the same principles upon which Owen Arthur thrived as a moral being. Honesty, industry, service to others above self, and all to be judged by standards of excellence. There's a word called integrity. It involves honesty, but it goes beyond honesty. And I have to say to you, sir, that I have met a lot of persons who belong to that generation. You meet them at the age of 20, and you meet them at the age of 70, and it is the same person. Unwavering in their commitment to values, moral values. They are constant and consistent. People who live an entire life imbued with the virtue of integrity. A generation who has been able to self-examine and to self-interrogate. And this is the question you normally hear them ask, taught to them by their parents. Before every major decision and even minor decisions, they pause. And the question becomes, but is it the right thing to do? That is the excellence of that generation. Are we therefore then surprised that that generation gave the highest quality of service to this country over the last 50, 55 years? Some are about to retire. Some have retired. And in some tragic cases, some have died. A prime minister is dead. Have we once paused to express gratitude to any of them? Our immediate purpose, of course, today is to express gratitude to Owen Arthur. But I want to extend that to his generation, a generation of excellence, that we must never take public service for granted. Never take it for granted. And in expressing gratitude to that generation, in expressing gratitude to Owen Arthur, whose death I regret, I repeat the words of the poet Binyon. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we shall remember them. We shall remember them. Those retired, those died, and those otherwise forgotten. Let us remember them and let us express gratitude. It was only after Owen Arthur's death that I saw the video of his last speech in Parliament. And it was an amazing speech, short, but quite an amazing speech. And that speech was amazing because it contained his prescription for the conduct of this Parliament. And with an amazing prescience, he said that this period in Barbados' history would be the most difficult period over which any Parliament would have supervision. And he wrote his prescription, and he left his legacy for this Parliament. He left his legacy by which this Parliament must conduct itself. And it wasn't contained in any lofty micro or macroeconomic theories. This child of a humble mother, this child of a humble father, went right back to his roots. And he quoted Paul's famous letter to the Philippians. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. And with those words, Owen Arthur left parliamentary service in Barbados. With those words. At 4 p.m. on August the 14th, 2020, the metaphorical clock that was marking the day that was Owen Arthur's political life conjoined with the clock of reality, 4 o'clock. And it was a sad moment. Sad moment. When all of us stood in that church and saw a casket bearing the remains of a man who had given service to this country. And I thought not only of him, but I thought of his generation that has retired without gratitude. I thought of his generation that may yet die without expressions of gratitude. And the casket bore those mortal remains out of that parish church. And we all men and women who are conscientious must have felt the sting of death, the sting of his death, and the sting of the death, perhaps, of a generation retired a generation, in some cases, dead. But I seek reassurance that although there's a sting of death, that there shall be no victory in the grave, since we expect that the light of the contribution made by that generation, the light of the contribution made by that patriot called Owen Arthur, must continue to be illuminated across public service in this country. And if I can be so presumptuous as to even suggest to his relatives and fellow parishioners in St. Peter that a kind tribute would be to erect above his grave that lies within that humble soil at Nazareth, to erect above that grave, such as they have done with John F. Kennedy, an eternal flame, an eternal light, as testimony and testament to what he did, and testimony to generations yet unborn, that on the humble soil of Nazareth, on the humble soil of Ben Hill and All Saints and Mile and a Quarter, once ran a child who became a man of excellence and who ran this country according to the highest principles of integrity. And I think that would be a fake tribute to this gentleman. And now, today, is the only time given to me to say farewell. Farewell to Owen Arthur. And permit me to do it again with the poet Martin Carter, in the second verse of his poem called Death of a Comrade. Dear comrade, if it must be, you speak no more with me, nor smile no more with me, nor march no more with me, then let me take a patience and a calm, for even now the green leaf explodes, sun brightened stone, and all the river burns. Now from the morning vanguard moving on, dear comrade, I salute you, and I say, death will not find us thinking that we died. I am so pleased to be addressing this Parliament, Your Honor, in the presence of his relatives. That is, for me, the most important portion of what I do here today. And I condole with Mrs. Julie Arthur. I condole with Sabrina and Leah, his daughters. I condole with Isabella. I condole with his sister Valme and his brother Richard. I extend those sincere condolences to the extended family and to his excellent generation, well represented in the persons of Dr. Elliot Duglin, wherever you are this afternoon, sir, and Mr. Hainsley Ben, wherever you are today, sir. Excellent men, excellent members of that extended family, and excellent representatives of that generation who built this country over the last 50 years. I condole with all of you, and ask simply, may Owen Seymour Arthur's spirit journey with God. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Honorary Member for St. Michael East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The brother that spoke before me, parliamentary representative of Christchurch South, the last time I interact with former Prime Minister, the late Owen Arthur, was in your presence. I wouldn't tell the story of the nature of the conversation. But of course, at that time, there were some tensions between Owen and myself. And I said on more than one occasion to my colleagues I wanted to have the privilege to say, I am sorry. But these are the vicissitudes of life, especially in politics itself. There are times, and I think that I have also had the experience during my days in cabinet prior to 2008, where for the first time in my life, I felt as though I was a victim of power. In Owen Arthur turning to his right at the time in the cabinet and saying to you, Pressy, I will fire you, in those strong terms. and as George said earlier, I tremble because it was the first time I was coming face to face with a man with so much power vested in him at a specific time. And he went on to say, if I was Prime Minister when Don Blackman was doing the things that he did, he said, I would have fired him too. I don't know what inspired the comments. And at the time, I was a little jittery at the way in which he responded, but the reality is that here I was, a man who used to be working for $350 a week, and I knew about buying a Suzuki van and selling potatoes and yams, holding the degree in Barbados. I could not get a job, and a Prime Minister was now taking away a ministerial salary from me, but he still dropped me back to MP. So I still felt that I was relatively well off, and I gave him the story. I said, well, Prime Minister, the prerogative is yours to make that decision. I'm hoping that that model, as much as I love him, I'm hoping that model did not influence more recent events that occurred in my political experiences. Anyhow, let me say this to you, sir. The absence of Owen Arthur constitutes a major political void in contemporary history of Barbados. The things that he stood for were special guidelines that he bequeathed to all of us. And the mantra in which he constantly expressed, to me, underpins the kind of person that he was. Many people will have their different perspectives of him, but I'm going to tell you my perspective of him. He was committed to a journey. He was committed to a journey related to the eradication of poverty. He echoed it in the mantra of I am here to stop poor people from being poor. The leader of the opposition said it. It was his rallying cry many times in election campaign, but it was also his mantra. It was a political underpinning that shaped everything that he was, because he set about on a journey. And he was very clear, no politician who comes into politics, not only leaders, no politician who comes into politics and say they don't have any philosophical guidelines, don't know what it is they are into politics for, don't know what it is they want to achieve, don't have no purpose, nothing to defend, should never be in here, because he doesn't know what he wants to do for the people who elected him to come to Parliament. And that's my view. Owen Arthur was very clear that he had to find a way of counting the traditional models in society in which there was that level of inequity and people not distributing the wealth of this country in the manner that it ought to be done. And that came as a consequence of having a framework of what he wanted to achieve. And that is why Owen Arthur, very early in his political career, said, look, these outdated traditional institutions which we have had in the form of the National Housing Corporation could not do what he wanted done as expeditiously as it ought to be done. And O'Nafa said to himself, there's a necessity, it is an imperative that new configurations be created to deliver. Poverty is not debatable. You don't defer poverty. When a man is hungry, when a man needs a house to live in, you don't put it back till next year. You have to find a mechanism to be able to address the social concerns of people immediately. And O'Nafa formed the Urban Development Commission. But O'Nafa went as far as to put legislation in place to make sure that there was a body of laws or provisions in the law that will help him to form the guidelines to how we respond to the public issues in urban Barbados, and also did the same thing for rural Barbados. He was very clear, and he understood the urgency. The concept of economic enfranchisement was very clear on the agenda. Ownership of property. I heard others talk about it already, and we don't have to try to create new strands to demonstrate that we understand him better than anybody else. The reality is you look at the trajectory, the consistency of the man and the things that he focuses attention on. And the economy was fundamental, but not excluding social policy and social engineering. You understand it well. And I'll tell you this. I remember on an occasion, he was coming across Mays Road in my constituency, the constituency to which I have the honor of representing many people, but more so the poor people. Licorice Village, Mylor's Hill, the Ivy. And I will die, as I said, I will die with my boots on. Nobody under the sun could ever tell me to walk away. I walk away when the people tell me to walk away. So I want that very clear to everybody in here, and all those who are within earshot of my voice. There will be a time when there will be a need, because I am not here until eternity, but as long as I have breath in my body and this intellect remains as lucid, even if other people believe that it is not, I will remain until the people say no more. Nobody can purchase me. I am not an auctioneer. I am not selling the authorities that has been vested in me by the people of St. Michael's East. And when I met O'Nafa that day, he said, look, I want to have a conversation with you. I must have a conversation with you. He was coming out of a shop that we don't call is Gloria Hall shop in Mays Road. He said the government cannot do it alone. We have to work in collaboration with a number of institutions, number of non-governmental institutions. He wasn't talking about no Toastmasters. He wasn't talking about no Lions Club. He was talking about the Israel Level Foundation, the Pineland Theatre Workshop. I knew this man had a vision, and he understood the required organs that would allow him to achieve the things that he went about to achieve. And on that occasion, he asked me about the programs that we were doing. At that time, he was the director of the Israel Level Foundation. And he told me, look, get a project proposal and send it to me. But make sure that the items that you put in that proposal would, in a major way, address issues of poverty and the eradication of poverty. You have a lot of poverty in this community, and I want you to make a meaningful contribution. And the first time I ever sat down with the executive of that body and draft up a project proposal. And within a short space of time, I got a response. I must tell you that when Owen Arthur was no more, I never got any help from any of the government agencies, Not only on NIFI DLP, but under this government too. Never got any help since then. So I could not continue the programs, and it's just from taking money out of my pocket that the institution survived. But he was there for us. He was there for us. And it took, just like he sprung from obscurity, from Ben Hill. He recognized that ordinary men and women can play a meaningful role as well. Because it was clear. When Owen Arthur returned here, Owen Arthur was no national figure. He was considered as the boy from obscurity in that election. And the mystery of that election is as mystified as the one we had when we had the 30-11, because he was defeated by one vote. And then you had a recount. And I remember Mr. Leacock only spent a few seconds or day as a member of Parliament. And Owen Arthur, from a one-vote defeat, rose to become the Prime Minister of Barbados, from obscurity to Parliament. And as indicated by my good friend, my colleague from Christchurch South, Owen Arthur spent 3 terms. No other Prime Minister in the history of this country has spent 3 terms. And we must always remember that. And I think that this party would be worse off if we do not respect the legacy of Owen Arthur. If I told you at the 11th hour we had tensions, and I'm now telling you this, I believe I probably one of the most honest persons speaking on this issue. He was very clear. And no one must forget that. That at all times, I'm not going to tell you he's a paragon of virtue. I'm not going to say that even within the presence of his family. He was like any other human being. There's a time when Owen Arthur's tongue dripped acid. He cut up opponents, not only here, at the regional level. But it was also a testimony of the sound intellectual content on almost every issue under the sun. He wasn't superficial on any subject matter. What have you talked about? You heard people here saying Owen Arthur spoke almost like a scribe in relation to philosophical concepts. I gave Owen Arthur over 20 books on philosophy. And I got from the BBC. And he read them all. He invited me to his house and took me in the basement. And he said to me, anytime you need to read anything, come here and read it. That is the kind of man that he was. He tried to help, even when he felt that he had people who did not qualify to reach up to what is required in modern times. He was prepared to build the individual, especially if you came from grassroots origins. And a commitment to the defense of this sovereignty is mirrored in the manner in which he handled U.S. imperialism. When they want to come down here and ignore the laws of Barbados. Owen Arthur held meetings. And I remember, Sonny Michel, the Prime Minister went here and indicated that he wished he had the courage of Owen Arthur to stand up to the American presidency in the shipwriters' agreement. And Owen Arthur said, not here, Barbados would not fall victim to the tenets of any agreement of that kind or any abuse of coming into territorial waters. 166 square mile country. You can't ignore that. So he always understood the autonomy which he had as a leader. And when anyone tried to undermine that, well, then you had to face the town. Fortunately, he didn't have an army. But you had to face his town. And he would say what he has to say. Not only that, it took lots of courage. Not only to speak at Hull's University on the concept of reparation, but he went up. Many Caribbean leaders and even ordinary people in Barbados today doubt that there's any chance of any form of reparative justice. Some people don't even want me to speak on issues related to that crime called slavery and colonialism. People feel like you're a madman when people walking around here abusing all kinds of rights in Barbados, and every time you talk about it, people find ways of putting additional pressure on institutions and causing people to be victims. ONAFA stood up. And ONAFA established the Pan-Africanist Commission. And there were people in government and ministers then who never wanted to identify with the Pan-Africanist Commission. They didn't want it. They end up in the Prime Minister's office because they could not get the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to accept it as an organ of the state. And ONAFA pulled it in his ministry. I wish it had achieved more than it did. But it was a new formation, not known to the Caribbean, not known to the entire world. They had no precedent to follow. So the persons who went there had to find ways of doing things without offending the traditional areas where people want to preserve their own ministries and their own little territories and departments and so on. They had to find traditional ways. How can I communicate with countries across the world if I have a commission that is out here, not under foreign affairs? How can you get it done? And the commission put important matters on the agenda. And those things that we put on the agenda then are some of the most important planks in the development of the region that is on the agenda now. Because very few people even understand what reparation is. ONAFA had the foresight. And then ONAFA went up to Hull's University, the University of William Wilberforce, the same university that Dr. Hilary Beckles went to, and took the argument there. This man is a colossal. There's no Lilliputian in politics. You don't stand up to an American president and speak the way how he did. You don't come up with these policies and don't expect a reaction. And Barbados continued to develop. When he said to us, I will restore that 8% cut. Do you remember that, sir? He said, I will restore the 8% cut. And immediately after victory, he set about to make sure that the public service of Barbados got the restoration of that cut. In my view, that the court ruled on a specific case, but this is a layman pronouncing on a major breach of the Constitution and the statutory provisions of Barbados. This is the layman's view. That nobody should have lost that case in the court at that specific time. I ain't got to support everything that the judiciary say. I will never be one of those people. Because if I want to do that, I will got to be one of those people that involved in the apartheid system in South Africa, or working among the establishment in the antebellum South, where I believe in segregation and an apartheid system. So everything that I hear about the law, I don't fall victim to it and believe that the law is right. I deal with something a little higher than the law, I call justice. And when office, on more than one occasion, stood up in the manner that he ought to have stood up for the people of Barbados. Sir, this man, Owen Arthur, I believe epitomized something that is important. This party, from its groundings in the 1930s, was shaped in the initial, and I think that the honorable member for Christchurch South also indicated that that philosophy emerged from the people. It emerged from the people. This is no elitist handout. This is no succession right. He had no succession rights. His father, his mother, all of them were unknown in the body politics of Barbados. He came from no traditional family. The people put him there because they trust him. The people put him there. And all that he was doing in his time is bringing this party back on track. I know political parties got a tendency of hailing everybody. Everybody, whoever is the leader, he's the greatest man on earth. He's the greatest woman on earth. That is fanaticism. Only cronies echo that foolishness. And probably when I've had the problem of not abandoning course, but he had the problem of trying to give a little satisfaction to some working class cronies who felt that handouts was necessary because they felt they were important. All prime ministers got to be careful with cronies. Even today, cronies are dangerous in body politics. And when they talk, they're talking about themselves. They're not interested in nobody. They have no track record of doing anything for their mothers, their sisters, their aunts, their grandmothers. They did nothing for nobody. Over the years, and I've understood parasites. People that suck the blood of the state. And people who commit themselves for a lifetime to the betterment of the society itself must not be allowed to dominate in this country, because we will be breaching the fundamentals of the principles that Owen Arthur set for us. And those are the legacies that must be protected at all times. It is fundamental. And if I never said anything to my colleagues in Parliament that makes sense, let that be my first sensible comment. Don't allow cronies to emerge, because you will pay the price. Cronies are parasites. And Owen Arthur was very clear. Sir, I don't know. Sometimes I would just be saying these things and no intention to be offended to be offensive in any way to anybody. But I had the greatest admiration for him because he never went off course. But of course, challenges would occur along the way. Because in my experience in politics, sometimes you meet some ambitious people. And those ambitious people probably have agreed. They have agreed. Believe that they should be rewarded for doing nothing. And sometimes you, as a leader, these people are all around you every day. Every day. I recall on the eve of the election before 2008, I was Minister of Social Transformation at the time. And I kept saying to the Prime Minister then, PM, I understand the outstanding track record which you have. About a 6% unemployment level, which was considered full employment in Barbados according to the theories of the economists. Full employment, 6%. Then I do who unemployed and who can't eat when the day come. But economists put these things down on paper and conclude that everything is all right because the figures look good. And they had over $2.7 billion in the foreign reserves. And the Prime Minister said then, Pressy made the track record good. I said to him, PM, I don't like what I'm hearing. I had a discussion, and the opposition party at the time was very confident. And I remember the last Prime Minister, the then leader of the opposition, saying to me, I am walking on water. And he said, I am waiting on you. Because I may hold different views sometimes. Not because I hate anybody, but these are my views, and I feel good when I say what I want to say. As I can't say what I want to say, you and I get fall out. Even my mother that day, right? We can fall out. When Arthur said to me, I am all right, Pressy. I am ready. I told him, Prime Minister, I still believe that we need to use the social services to pump some capital inside the local environment as a form of preparatory work for victory. I do not believe, some people
You're using very, I remember using it's a very crafty language. So continue. Using crafty language.
Someone is even trying to take me a little further. Tell me they call it pork barrel politics. I don't think that we were thinking about that at the time, but I still felt that there was a necessity for greater distribution. And although we had the aesthetics of the figures looking very appealing and so on, I thought that reality required that we still go pump some largesse inside the individual communities. But he stood up. He stood up on what he called a principle, that I had done enough. I have done enough. And if I can't win on this, right, well, that is it. But he was very confident. And at that time, my view is that he was beginning to disconnect from the reality of how poor people respond in crisis. Nobody don't want to hear no economist telling them what no gross domestic product and per capita income when a man broke. Right? When so many people are broke, so many people are unemployed. And we must never reach that level to talk about $2.7 billion in reserves and full of glee. When there's so many poor people, whenever you turn a corner, you see poor people laying outside of the street. No housing, no food, can't feed the children. Young men on the street doing anything when they want money. And you could got 20 police officers here. When a fellow want money and he asks for it, and you don't pull it out, he said, get money. That is the environment that you're in. Get money. You come out broke, and the fellas take out the gun out the pocket. Owen Arthur, in my mind, remained constant. He was always connected. He was always connected. But as I said, sometimes you take advice from other people who visit Bridgetown once every 365 days. Never went through Nelson Street yet. Never buy lunch in Nelson Street yet. Don't know where Swan Street is, because it's shot at Cave Shepherd. They know all the clubs. Well, not even clubs, because they don't call them so. These people enjoy the yacht club, you know. And these people enjoy, what is that club in Bay Street name? These are the places that these people go and want to make you believe that the master blessed them with a special talent. And that they must rule things and dictate and boss around people as they like. Treat people as they like. You know when these people like to capture the people from the African continent, you know these people getting the trinkets? People getting the trinkets because people believe that you're so cheap that it can do anything that they want to do to you. And then tokenism, and you're recaptured. ONAFA understood that. I don't have to tell you all the conversations of its kind. If you, sir, one of these days I will speak more openly on his philosophy that I believe, because if I say everything that I have heard him saying and things that he told me, I am not saying this because he's not here. I knew that he understood it. And he kept saying to me over and over, I have reconnected this political party to the grassroots of Barbados. That is what I'm talking about. I have reconnected, and I'm watching it carefully. I am watching to see if the grassroots remain connected or if the grassroots will be disconnected. So I will know if we're on track or not. I will know if you're on track or not. Because he said, remain connected to the grassroots. Don't mind what you hear. There were many who never wanted me to be here. And he was not lying, because I remember hearing the echoes of people talking about how puffy his eyes were. He had puffy eyes. And did everything to discredit the man for not being worthy. And he defeated all of those things. He defeated all of those things to turn out to be one of the best. And in my view, I'm struggling to determine who was the best between him and the former leader, Errol Walton Barrow, you know. I am trying to make the decision. There are two distinguished prime ministers in Barbados. Two late prime ministers. ONAFA has to be either the best or Errol Walton Barrow. Who don't like that, I'm sorry for you. Because they've transformed. They transformed. They're not cash boys. None of them work at the cost of Fogarty running coins. These are decision makers. People who made decisions to change life. People who come and say, look, black people must have an opportunity to go to university. They had no university, but we had them. They were saying, pollute your head about Codrington College. Bar. I remember coming through the saying to me, when I was in the Senate, the first man who ever sent me to the Senate and felt like I had some worth was Errol Walton Barrow. First man coming through the said to me, Trevor, do you know that in 1961, when Errol Walton Barrow wanted to introduce free secondary education universally, I told him, I have no money. He said, I told you to start it. Money will come. This was part of the void in the body politics. And Cameron Trudeau told me, I started it. I didn't know who I could pay, how I could pay for nothing. But I started it. And I'm likening that to ONAFA, because when ONAFA recognized that I have to redistribute this wealth across this country, ONAFA said, these are the mechanisms. It must be started. I must eradicate poverty. Pressy put me as consultant. I won my seat. Called me one day and he said, I want you to be consultant to work in collaboration with Hamilton Lashley. He was the wild boy from the pine and I was the wild boy from the ivy. But they saw virtues in the two of us and they asked us to work together. Myself and Hammy started off on the back of trucks. We had the vehicles and we get on the back of pickups that drove through various districts across Barbados. I remember telling people if we could move this house today and replace it by tonight, you will get one. And they worked magic. And so did he. But he got tarnished in this country because of an ackee tree. Because people took the ackee tree and made a mountain of it, and the same man could not even pay his bills. So he was not achieving anything by working in that manner with anybody. He was very genuine about what he was doing. And I see people take him and jettison him out of the body politics. I don't be surprised at anything that happened to me. Because I would say to him every day, brother, if you ever do something that the media or politicians, even within the party to which you belong, can point at, you're going to get a Sunday paper front page. They will treat you worse than how they treat Don Villenis. And I watched that man there. I watched that man there now. Because somebody said that he gave away $11,000 for an ackee tree. And there was a national debate, and men steal all kind of money in Barbados from the state and the taxpayers of this country. But Owen Arthur said to me, I want you to make sure you look. The people did not even come to us in many cases. We went into the communities and we identified all kinds of derelict buildings. We identified poverty. We brought in carpenters and masons. And we reconstruct houses for poor people.
I remember you have 2 more minutes.
All across, thank you, sir, all across Barbados. We decided then we will repair tenantry roads. We work with the urban development at that time and the rural development, but mainly urban development, to make sure that land that people live on for a considerable time. I think at one time it was about 2 houses or more in order to qualify for the right to own the land. And then the opposition at the time argued strong that we were depriving even landlords who had family living overseas. And when they wanted to come back home, they had no land. They moved it up to 3 houses or more. Then they went to about 5 houses or more. Could not understand the philosophical thinking that was applied to the Tenantry Freehold Persons Act and better interpreted under the Owen Arthur government. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of Barbadians who were landless, who own land as a consequence of Owen Seymour Arthur across Barbados. There were people who walked and stamped their toes every day in unpaved roads, who had to walk with 3 and 4 pairs of high-heel shoes, baby dolls and all, through the mud. And Owen Arthur put small contractors in place in order to provide well-paved roads for them. So there is evidence. There is evidence, empirical, strongly supported by any scientific data, that what Owen Arthur said is what Owen Arthur did. There are lots of people that talk very pretty, but when we got to scratch down, we're looking for the track records to see what it is they have done in life, you can't even remember a quotation from them. You know, there are people that be opponents for 20 years, 15 years, nobody can remember them. You don't have to get put out of here, the boy don't remember them. I tell you, because they never even feed the mother. They never even feed their mother. I know a man that the family's suffering all now in Parliament. And we help the body. Everybody trying to see if they can enjoy all the ostentation that is possible while they're in Parliament. I'm going to look for the mother living in a little shadow house. Brothers struggling. Sometimes my brothers before the court, they hide it, they want a boy know as the brother. You understand the kind of society that we're living in? You understand Onapa had a clear vision. You ever hear about a visionary? And he said to himself, mission must be accomplished. While Beckford was saying, I focused on persistent poverty, Onapa was saying, I am concentrating on the eradication of poverty. An ideal type for some people, but he saw it as a reality that can become true. You want to read Beckford? But there are some people that believe poverty must be here forever and that we can never eradicate poverty. And they got some people in here still that believe that we must concentrate on the preservation of the middle class. Onapa understood how we are to uplift the working class in these circumstances. Because you've got a fragile middle class and we must help to sustain them, but you must ignore the majority class, which are the hardest working people in this country. And therefore, sir, I know you must come home, but therefore, sir, let me say, let me thank you. Let me say it this time. I thank you, sir. Look, Onapa, I come to the conclusion every day, as I detail the examination of this great man, that this is the best Prime Minister Barbados has ever had. I seriously believe that. The latter days of his life, unfortunately, might overshadow many things. But the few things that I have mentioned to you, and certainly not fully expanding on the positive benefits of the things, repairing roads, putting in roads, putting in housing, making sure you got a poverty alleviation program, reparations, all of these things, the Pan-Africanist Commission, UDC, RDC, Tenantry Freehold Person Act. When you look at that, within 14 years of the man's contribution, nobody can better that. Not since 1951 in self-government. When you look at the amount of ordinary people that Onapa embraced, I was not subject to the pressures of cronies. He protected them. He protected them. I want all of us to be guided by that great legacy which he has given us, that must remain the blueprint of the Barbados Labour Party as we move forward in a very progressive way into general development of Barbados. Sir, I want to thank you very much. I know you always complain about this helicopter, not understanding that
there's a new session, sir, so I will not complain about the helicopter.
Thank you
the
very
helicopter
much.
will not be allowed to linger.
Well, thanks very much. So obviously, I stood within the framework of the rules which you were responsible for. Thank you very much, sir.
Honourable member for St. Michael North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't propose to make a contribution to wax as philosophical as the two speakers who went before me. I rather really intend to make quite a practical presentation this afternoon. And I want to begin by saying that Barbados is the poorer on the passing of the late Professor Arthur. I truly believe that he was a phenomenal man who was really determined to use his skills and his ability to ensure that there was a betterment in the lot of people in this country, particularly the poor in this society. His journey, particularly in his early days in politics, was not an easy journey. It was not straightforward. After a very torrid nomination process for the first by-election, he ended up finding out that he was losing, he lost by actually just one vote, which is a tormenting reality. Having lost by one vote, he then had to go through a court case and then another by-election before he made it finally into this hallowed chamber. Really only because of the determination of himself and that of then Prime Minister Tom Adams. Then after winning his seat in 1984, he went on to find that the government, he won his seat as a government MP, the government lost the next election, and he became not only an opposition member, but an opposition member of only three MPs that became known as the three blind mice, who had to go in Parliament every single week and face a torrid government bench, set of government benches every single week. He had to do that, Mr. Speaker, and that could not have been easy. But while people may see that as a negative, I really feel that that is where Oyenatha really honed his political skills. Having as one of three people every week to formulate arguments, shadowing endless numbers of government ministries, that is where Oyenatha honed his political skills. And as fate would have it, he then went on to become the leader of the Barbados Labour Party. And within a few years of becoming leader of the Barbados Labour Party, he then actually became the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mr. Speaker. A very, very admirable feat after a very, very shaky start. And it's clear, Mr. Speaker, that Mr. Oyenatha's ascension to the position of Prime Minister brought many benefits, obviously firstly to St. Peter, of course to the Barbados Labour Party, and also to the country of Barbados. He was a visionary Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, and he was loved by the masses of this country. And I make that point very, very strongly, because after Sir Grantley Adams, we know of the fantastic contribution of Tom Adams, the transformative policies he put in place for this country. We know of the work of Bernard St. John, who was actually my mentor and idol in politics. I consider him actually to be the most intelligent leader that Barbados may ever have had. But it was Oyenatha who was most loved by the masses of this country since Sir Grantley Adams in the Barbados Labour Party. And one thing that he did, the Barbados Labour Party always had the image of the party of the business class, even the party of the white elite, if we are to be honest. Oyenatha shook that image, that so-called stain, off of the Barbados Labour Party and gave it the image of being a party of the masses and for ordinary Barbadians. But as flattered as he was by that, and the extent to which the masses loved him was clear, it was obvious. But he was not flattered by that, because he knew why he went into politics. And he was determined that even that flattery was not going to take him off of the path upon which he had embarked when he decided to start his political journey. And that was, as I said, to improve the lot of people, and as we heard from so many others today so far, to stop poor people from being poor. And he set about in a very disciplined way to carry out what he saw as his mission. So from punctuality to policy formulation and policy implementation, he was a perfectionist. Yes, Mr. Speaker, even with punctuality. And I have seen him already rip some people to shreds for turning up to meetings just 15 or 20 minutes late, or even less time than that. Even people who were actually volunteering, not even government members of parliament or anything, people who were just volunteering to assist. He was so disciplined and he was the political equivalent to Michael Jackson in music. He was a perfectionist. No imperfection at all was tolerated by him. And he also decided, although he was a qualified economist, one of the best around, as we all know, he did not set out to prove in politics that he was to be seen as the best economist in the world. He did not see his economic qualification as the end in itself. He saw his economic qualifications as a tool, the tool that he was going to use to ensure that he could empower and enfranchise and better as many people as he possibly could in this society. When you sat in a room with Owen Arthur, with other economists as well, invariably, they would speak first. You would go from some who would be, I would call, self-appointed economists. And they would speak. And you would say, well, they sound pretty okay. Then actual economists would speak. And you would say, well, they sound very good. There can't be anything left now to say. But when Owen Arthur joined the discussion, there was so much else to be said that he said. And he would take the discussion sometimes up to another level altogether. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? He never left the discussion at the other level. He would always bring it down and break it right down to show that what he was talking about would show you how it was impacting you on your kitchen table, or how it was impacting you in your pocket. He wasn't interested in being seen as the world's greatest economist. His economics qualifications was the tool that he was going to use to bring about a betterment for those in society. He was not just an academic or theoretical economist, but he was about using his skills to bring about change. And he started out as a prime minister, finding an unemployment rate in this country of around 23-24%. And he pledged to create 30,000 jobs. And he did it. Did it, Mr. Speaker. In fact, more than 30,000 jobs. He found the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act, which was revolutionary, enfranchising thousands and thousands of ordinary Barbadians. He decided he was going to go further, deal with the issue of urban tenantries, to empower and enfranchise thousands more, again, as part of the property owning democracy in this country. He established the Urban Development Commission, Rural Development Commission, to ensure that the little things that matter to people all over Barbados, urban and rural, were looked after. As he was doing that, given his vast knowledge of every area of government, really, and also his reliance on his ministers, the ones he had appointed, particularly the ones he had appointed to economic ministries, and I must concur with a comment made earlier by an earlier speaker, that he did in fact give his ministers quite a lot of latitude. He really, really did. Of course, if he didn't deliver, you would have to explain why. But certainly he gave you free rein, having appointed you to do certain things. I remember even, there was a time when I'd become a minister not too long before. And I had to make a trip with him as part of Barbados' delegation to Guyana in the Intersessional Heads of Government meeting. And I was at the airport about to depart, and I realized that he was not there. And then now the late Carol Inks, who was PS in his ministry, came and said to me, Minister, there's a problem with the hospital, and you are now the leader of this delegation. Is you talking to me? Intersessional heads, prime ministers, and I am now being told, as we are at the airport waiting to depart, that I am not the leader of the delegation because the prime minister has to stand, but he will come, but I will have to hold on until he gets there. And I went to Guyana as head of the delegation, got the briefs, stayed in the room the next night, came down for breakfast the next morning after that for a meeting, just before the meeting, early before the meeting started. And I had to go and, as best I could, with all the advices I had and the information I had, and sit at the table and make interjections as instructed that Barbados needed to make. And then when the meeting was about to finish, when Arthur turned up, and they said, but Skip, you made some hot water here, man. And he told me, Mr. Toppin, if I did not think that you could do it, I would not have asked you to do it. That is what he told me. And I never forgot those words. So he had some confidence in me, eventually, but I'll get to that a bit later in my presentation. But as he was dealing with those things, practical economist, being the practical economist, he used his vast knowledge of all areas of the economy to bring about overall economic benefit for Barbados. So you saw record foreign reserves, and there's a place for that. People can't poo-poo these sort of things because, as was said earlier, there's no love without money. So there were record foreign reserves, record employment, record tourism arrivals, manufacturing was booming, and that's just a small number of the things that I would list on that. In the midst of all that, to deal with the national consciousness, you heard he appointed the Pan-African Commission and established the national heroes there. So he was a comprehensive politician and a comprehensive prime minister, dealing with all of the possible angles. And I will repeat that Barbados today is the poorer on the passing of the late Owen Arthur. It would, Mr. Speaker, be remiss of me if I did not speak about our relationship and what he did for me in politics. It would be remiss of me. I started my involvement in politics in 1987. I won my seat in 1994, but it took me 7 years to win the seat. I started in 1987, contested the 1991 election under Sir Henry Ford, now Sir Henry, and then the 94 election under Owen Arthur. And if I am to be honest, Mr. Speaker, I have to say that it was clear to the purblind that in my early political days, I was definitely not part of Owen Arthur's plans for how he wanted to do things and how he wanted to handle the affairs of this country. In fact, to be even more honest, there was tension between us. I must say more from his side than my side, but he was my senior, so I could not be sure to have any tension towards him. But there was tension, there was obvious tension. I was not, he did not have me in his plans. That's pretty clear. And I remember, in fact, a conversation I had in his office, the leader of the opposition's office in Parliament, around 1993, because I was gearing up again for the 1994 election. And there were, in fact, two other people in the constituency both calling his name, saying that he sent them to run to seek the nomination in that constituency. One of whom I believe was true, that it was really true. The other one was a complete madman. So I really didn't believe that one. But I remember trying to set up a meeting with Owenatha over and over and over. He set in times, I turning up, he wouldn't be there. And eventually one day, his secretary, Shirley King, I was working in Bernard St. John's office on Penfold Street, not far from Parliament. And I got this call. Shirley called me one day and said, Ronald, he here, no, come here, no, come here, he here. And I ran over from the office. I went over to the opposition office. And I was sitting there, and he was talking, and he didn't really take me on too much, to be honest. But I was determined that our eyes had made for, and I wasn't leaving till I got to speak to him. After about 35 minutes, I was sitting down there waiting. He told me, come, Mr. Topping. And I went to the office. And I told him I had come because I have an interest in running in next elections for Sir Michael North. And I plan to seek the nomination, but there were those people who running around saying that you sent them. Tell me, so what? So I said, well, I just came to get your thoughts. He said, well, if you are so thin-skinned that you can't take on 2 people, then you shouldn't be in politics. So we started to rally each other for a while. And then after I got to a certain point, I decided, well, I got to show what I'm made of. And they said, you know, Mr. Arthur, if I want to run in to seek the nomination for Sir Michael North, I'm going to seek it and I'm going to get it. You can't stop me. Even if you come and run against me for the nomination, you can't get it. You understand? In fact, I only came to you as a courtesy. So understand that. And he told me, but you really underestimate me, though? I said, no, you underestimate the support I have in the constituency. And then he started driving around the constituency and getting a few agents to drive around the constituency to check and see what level of popularity I had. I know of one encounter he had with somebody that was not very pleasant. And then afterwards, he started to back off and allow the nomination process to play out the way that it should. But I had to stand up to him. As I said, I was not a part of his original plan. Then I got the nomination and I won the seat. And the BFP formed the government. What does he do? He does not appoint me to the cabinet. Although a number of other first-time winners, Liz Thompson, Mayor Motley, Reginald Farley, who didn't even contest, he put all of them in the cabinet, excluded me, told me, go and run the statutory board and get some practice. I get back to you. Okay? Then I did that. The following year, or shortly afterwards, Sir Richard Johnny Chattenham resigned from the cabinet. Then he calls me one day and tells me, this was the day after the Cola Syrup no confidence motion that David Thompson attempted that backfired against the members of Michael Northeast. He called me, I was sitting in my office today. I had to make a speech in there as chairman of the National Petroleum Corporation, where I was the board chairman, that apparently impressed him. So as I'm sitting in my office, I got this phone call at 3 o'clock the Wednesday afternoon. The secretary told me, Mr. Topping, Prime Minister on the phone for you. I took the call. He said, Mr. Topping, Rawley's fund is not well. I want you to act as Minister of Agriculture for 30 days in the first instance. I said, okay. I said, effective when? Tell me tomorrow. I actually said, you might find this surprised, but he said, well, I can't do it. Because it was Thursday and a Friday, and I had 2 cases, one the Thursday and one the Friday, for which I was fully paid. And that was the decisive factor. You can be fully paid and don't turn up. So he said, cabinet secretary will call you. I was done with that. Cabinet secretary will call you. Cabinet secretary called me in a few minutes, told me, asked me how I can work around tomorrow. I said, well, my discourse is supposed to start at 9 o'clock. Suppose he could get there for 10. He said, I'm going to have you sworn at 9 o'clock. So then I went to the cabinet. He told me he wanted me to get 6 things to cabinet in that month. 6 cabinet papers, 6 projects. The one, after I took my brief and I told him that one was out of the question altogether. It was out of my power. It could not be done. So he said the other 5. So in that month, I got all 5 of those things to the cabinet, working till 2 o'clock in the morning, Ministry of Agriculture. So then now, after the month, he indicates to me that he's going to keep me in the cabinet. But not as a minister now, but as a minister of state. Not a full minister. So it was always a situation where I had to just continue proving myself to him. Not a full minister, but a minister of state. Then after I served that time as Minister of State and got a number of things done in relation to international transport, he invited me then in the 1999 election to then serve fully as a Minister of Commerce, Consumer Affairs, and Business Development. I had to start up a Fair Trading Commission, which I did. I remember once being overseas, Mr. Speaker, but twice, again, I forgot to mention to you, that twice when I was overseas on government business, he issued a recall for me to come back to Barbados right away. Once when there was some problems with cruise industry vis-a-vis Grenada, and some other matters you can't recall. So I had to pull up ropes from overseas on government business and come back right away. But it was the 3rd time. Then I got the call and I was overseas. It came through, I was in Miami. This was not on government business. And I got this call from the Consul General, Ben Martinez, that the cabinet office is trying to reach me because the Prime Minister has indicated he wants me to come back home, right away to present a cabinet paper. So I told Ben, I said, well, Ben, you have a choice. You can tell the Prime Minister that you tried to reach me, but you did not get me. He said, he's not a liar, he's not doing that. I said, well, I agree with you. In your position, I would not do it either because I'm not a liar either. And everybody knows I'm not a liar. I said, well, then you will have to tell the cabinet office, to tell the Prime Minister, I am not coming back. I am not coming back. I said there's a lot of financial commitment I made. Family members were involved on the trip, and I am not coming back home, full stop. He told me, the Prime Minister is not going to be very pleased to hear that. I said, well, he'll get over it. Or he will make a decision, such a decision as he will make, and I will await that decision. And then after I hung up from Ben, I never heard anything more, and the vacation was completed. When I got back to Barbados, I went to cabinet the next meeting. The face was set up towards me, and then eventually it wasn't set up no more. Simple as that. But I always had, in my early days, to fight up a bit. But as time went on, precisely because of first in my performance, as he perceived it, as a minister, and then my ability to stand my ground is what earned me his respect. And I really want to say to young politicians and aspiring politicians, you have to stand your ground. Nobody's telling you to curse a Prime Minister or disrespect a Prime Minister. But sometimes they can say, I do not agree, Prime Minister. That's not hard. That's not hard to do. I have done it already, as I said, many, many times. And I did it too because the politician or the political leader who can intimidate me or can induce fear in me is not yet born. That's a fact. It's not yet born. And what I did was I took the tension that was coming from Oinatha towards me, and used it to toughen me up as a politician. In fact, I would say that he really put me through the hottest fires. And I think I have become the finest steel. And for that, Mr. Speaker, I thank him. I really, really thank him. Those were the early days, Mr. Speaker. He did go on, as I said, to respect me quite a lot, even if he didn't fully like me, he respected me. As the years went by, it reached the stage where we did develop a bond. And I could say then, yes, he liked me. And in fact, he went to places repeatedly and spoke in glowing terms about me as a minister, saying that I was one of his finest performing ministers. That's a fact. In my ministry, in fact, in recent times, he was doing some work in my ministry. And he actually repeatedly said to the staff, not that I was one of, but that I was his best performing minister, and that I was the only minister who ever fired him. That's a fact. He used to say that, which of course was not true. But in the last 10 to 12 years, we did become very, very close. I was able to call upon him for assistance with anything that I needed advice on, and he knew everything, to be honest with you. I even had a session with a group of others at his house one day when he referred us to some literature and some books, reports. His library was vast, and his knowledge was vast, and most importantly, he was always willing to share information. He saw no point in hoarding information. He was willing to share it with you so that, because when he shares it with you, it was not that he had lost the knowledge of it, but he had helped you to learn something or to know something that you had not known before. So, Mr. Speaker, as I near the end, because I don't think I'm anywhere near 30 minutes now, I want to say, though, that one thing that will stand out in my mind about Oinatha is that he really was the comeback kid. He really, really was the comeback kid. In the last decade or so, it's no secret that he made some statements. One member referred to his tongue on the acidity that it could sometimes effuse. And we all know there were times when he made some scathing remarks, some totally unprovoked and unnecessary. I couldn't understand for the life of me what was possessing him to say these things. There were times when he was seen in the company of some characters. I'm talking politically here now, on the other side of this, the political divide, in the form of the Democratic Labour Party. I call them characters because I feel generous. I would not call them what they really should be called. But there were times when he would hang with them in a way that would mystify me, it would confuse me. I don't know how a man of that caliber could be associated with that type of person at all. And he would sometimes make a lot of statements that you couldn't understand why, unprovoked, unnecessary. There were times when he did make some statements, in my view, totally provoked, and therefore his acidic response was entirely, in my view, understandable and correct, and I supported him. That's the fact. But whatever the reason, whatever, no matter how you got vexed with him, no matter how the Barbados Labour Party supporters got vexed with him, he always came back. He was a comeback kid. In a matter of weeks, if that long, everything he said was forgotten, and he was embraced again. Embraced again. And that was because not only of his likability, but because of his sheer ability and the fact that the knowledge that he had was always needed to be a part of the process going forward. And I was very pleased about this, even after the last election, even after the rancor of the election and comments that he had made, he still came back again, and he was embraced again. And let me tell you something too, he never, ever, ever stopped being a Barbados Labour Party supporter. He never, ever stopped. Never stopped. He was always a Barbados Labour Party supporter. He felt he did what he did because he felt he had to do it. That was his opinion. Agree or disagree? That was his opinion. He felt he had to do it. But at the heart of it all, he never, ever stopped being a Barbados Labour Party supporter. And even in my ministry, when he was doing work, because the last thing he did was the preparation of a report in relation to the industrial transformation of Barbados. And he told me that whenever we got around to rolling out the policies, he wanted to be involved. And he started to list other ministers that he was in communication with. And when they said, but you're willing to take on, he mentioned to me ministers who had asked him to do certain things. And he said, but so you can take on all of that? And his comment was, I can't say no to the Barbados Labour Party. I can't say no to the Barbados Labour Party. Because in his heart of hearts, he never ever stopped loving this Barbados Labour Party. And I am very pleased that we are able to stand here today. I'm sorry we are standing here today paying tribute to him as a deceased person. But I am glad that members in here, all who have spoken so far, and I sure hope that all who speak after me will recognize the tremendous contribution he made to this party. If we were to know, it's up to us. It really is now up to us. He has left us a fantastic legacy, a fantastic wicket to bat on. He managed to change the image that this party had through despite its performance, it had a certain image. He changed all of that. We owe him a debt of gratitude to continue the work that he did for the people of Barbados, particularly while being a member of this party. And I said, Mr. Speaker, his loss is a great loss to this country. And to his family, I wish to end now by expressing my deepest sympathy on behalf of myself, my family, and my political family in the constituency of St. Michael North. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for St. George North.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to pay compliments and also respect to my friend, the late Owen Seymour Arthur. He was my friend, and I believe that he would say the same thing if he was alive today. When I saw my friend Owen in that casket that afternoon, I felt that part of me was being taken away. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I remembered the words he said to me several years ago in 1993, Mr. Speaker, when we were on our way from the office of the Leader of the Opposition. He said to me, and he quoted from the book of Ruth, and he said that we were going to be like Ruth and Naomi. he said to me on that occasion, believe in the words which says, don't entreat me to leave you and return from following after you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Mr. Speaker, those are the words of true friendship. And later, I heard it when we lost the government in 2007, when on this floor of Parliament, the then Attorney General, who was the member for St. Michael's South, said that all of his friends have left him. The only friend he had was the member for St. George North in the Parliament of Barbados. And those words were recorded in the Hansard of this Parliament. And that evening, there were some biting words when Fandel Stewart, who was the member for St. Michael's South, wind up that debate. But I want to thank also because, you know, I thought that when I looked at his face on the evening in that casket, I must tell you that I believe that the undertakers did a wonderful job. And I thought, too, that his family really stayed with him, and also that his family helped him very well through his illness. And I want to compliment his wife and family, wife Julie, Leah, Sabrina, his grandchildren, all his extended families. I thought that they really rallied behind a true patriot, a man who we paid glowing tribute to. I must say that I remain a true disciple of Owen Arthur. Owen Arthur had strong principles and philosophy that many will find hard to emulate. Always said in simple terms, never forget where you come from. And of course, many have said, and that's one of the greatest philosophy which I will speak about. Don't forget where you come from. Try to stop poor people from being poor. We have spoken about that. And these are the philosophy which I want to put on the record in this Parliament today. Simple, but straightforward. Education is the key to success. Work hard for your living. Manage your affairs in a way that you can take care of your family. And of course, I heard the member for St. Michael North spoke about his belief in punctuality, keeping your word. And of course, he believed that the best will come out of the person if they go through the hottest fire. So that when the member for St. Michael North spoke about how he had the trials he went through, it was preparing him for the hottest fire. It was preparing him to be the finest minister we had. And of course, the member, in my estimation, who is my good friend, turned out to be one of the finest ministers of commerce. The member for St. Michael North. And I must say, too, that he has prepared our Prime Minister for the work ahead. And if she remained constant to the philosophy that we have just espoused and he has espoused over the years, she too will become a fine Prime Minister. And I must say too that I have seen her in the last 2 years demonstrating some of the principles that Owen taught us. And I want to say from this outset too, that he single-handedly took us after we lost the 1991 election, myself, the Minister Toppin. He wasn't Minister then, he was Ronald Toppin then, still is. Mortley, Mayor Mortley. The three of us, he took us and said, look, this is how you went wrong in 1991. And he helped us to manage our campaign. It was he who put a system in place which we now have. The system that we have in place now was put forward by Owen Arthur. And I must say, we want to thank him for doing that. A simple thing. Never forget where you come from. Always go down in the trenches, the heights, and get people to support you. Manage your affairs. If you stumble, get up, dust off, and go again. Never be too big to say sorry. And that's the name of the man. I also want to say too that we must understand that if we are supposed to demonstrate that we want to be true disciples of this great man, that we must be able to work hard. He never suffered fools, and I want to say that too. You had to perform. You had to perform, and he will trust you. Persons who were able to perform, those were the people who he relied on, not only in government, but also as his close friends. I must say to you that he has a similar background to mine, from humble beginning, and he always talk about his extended family in Rose Hill. He always talk about his mother. I think he loved his mother dearly, Mother Doll, and his brothers and sisters. He once said to me, and this helps to demonstrate the man that we now pay tribute to, that he was the first graduate, Mr. Speaker, in his family, the very first graduate from his family. And he said many nights he had to walk from Cave Hill to Rose Hill, St. Peter. In order to get an education, despite he was bright, despite he was gifted, he was from a poor family, and he had to walk many nights. Do you know what it is to walk from Cave Hill, Mr. Speaker, to Rose Hill, St. Peter? That's a far distance. Dark. In those days, there was no light. But he had to walk that distance in order to get an education. And then when he went on to Mona, I was told, I wasn't at Mona at the time, I never went to Mona only to pass through. But I was told that he was called task because he helped to prepare many of the Barbadian students at Mona. He was not a selfish person, Mr. Speaker. He shared his knowledge. He shared his knowledge among the Barbadian students and those students who were at Mona College. And they never forgot. Because I recall my friend Cyril Walker and at the time, and then Cyril Clark, coming to me some years ago and saying to me, and that's why when he became the leader of the Barbadian Labour Party in 1993, many persons gravitated to him and helped him to win, helped the Barbadian Labour Party to win that election. Because of his nature, what he did to help persons at university level, help persons at the graduate level, undergraduate level, and the poor man. He never forgot that. And therefore, when Owen said to us that he wanted a graduate in every household, he meant that. He meant every word. He wanted to stop poor people from being poor. And what did he do? What did he do by doing that? Through education, we saw the expansion of the University of the West Indies. And I recall when he became the Minister of Housing. In fact, I don't think I was the Minister of Housing then. I was the parliamentary secretary in the Ministry of Housing. He encouraged me to go to the university in those days with the professor, and the professor can recall these words, the professor there at the time, and Desmond Critchlow, and a guy called Andrew Lewis. I don't know if you recall these guys. One was the registrar, and the other one was under registrar, I think, something of that. But he was responsible for the expansion of university. All the hill, down the hill by Lazaretto, all that land, he said, we are going to give the university free of cost. And I support the Prime Minister in the call for renaming something of that university under him. Right? Because it was his idea to improve education in every way. And that's why the Prime Minister today could talk about EduTech. He supported EduTech. He saw that education was not rooted in at that time in present day chalk and talk. He saw that the days for teachers standing in front of class was numbered. Therefore, the EduTech program was introduced by him. He saw the need for community resource centers where persons were able to go back to the community centers and learn the technology, so that despite he was not trained from infant, because, you know, when you're a child, you learn, today, children learn the technology faster than adults. But because he did not learn this as a child, but he understood that the way forward was through technology. He understood that very well. He understood that. And therefore, he pushed education and the expansion of education. I don't know how many of you realize or knew that he wanted to have the education so rooted that he wanted to establish another university, an extension of the university in the city of Bridgetown. In the city of Bridgetown. And as Minister of Housing, he wanted me to look at the Mutual building to see how the university could expand into a city center. And we started that course, but we never completed it because we lost office. But the expansion of university was something OA wanted dearly. Just like how he wanted full employment. You know, he felt that people had the right to work. He was going to put that in the Constitution, that people had a right to work. And then when you heard his talk about, I want 30,000 jobs created, it was not a meaningless boast. He went through the figures and realized at the time, because when we took over office in 1994, we had 24% unemployment. He wanted to reduce that, and he was able to succeed by having unemployment reduced by 207 to about 6%. So he established almost full employment in this country by ensuring that people went to work. And you know something, Mr. Speaker? He did it without fanfare. He did not break the law. He did not create a deficit. The current account was balancing. And you know, he came to cabinet in 2007, December, and said, colleagues, the reserves is about $2.7 billion. Can you imagine that, Mr. Speaker? Unemployment down to almost 6%. Reserves up, and people doing well. And at that time, we have capital work program. We had the expansion of the ABC Highway. The country was doing well. And he could not understand why he could have lost the election in 2008, because the country was doing well. The country was doing well. And he felt that a group of well boys, because he called them well boys, were vying for the leadership of this country, and the people put them in there. The people of Barbados made a mistake, and I want to say this categorically now. The people of Barbados, I know it may not be politically wise to say this, but the people of Barbados made a political blunder when they put the Democratic Labour Party and Thompson in power. And we saw the problems that we had from 2007. The country ran well. You can imagine that when OA talk about the tenantries, I had the Prime Minister talk about the tenantries program today. He conceptualized the tenantries, the revised to the urban and private tenantries. And we were making poor people, having poor people the right to have a small part of their land at $250 a square foot. And you know, the concept of that was too, that you do not disadvantage the landlord, but that you give people the right to own the land at $250 a square foot. I had gone to housing conferences all over the world, and people were saying at the time, and I heard the former Minister of Housing spoke about today, that people around the world were saying, this is a revolutionary step. Do you know what it is to get land at $250 a square foot? And you're not disadvantaging the landlord. And the state was paying the difference between the economic costs. The state was paying, and a group of men came to power and stopped the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act. In your constituency, Mr. Speaker, what has happened? What has happened to urban tenantries? I am saying, and I spoke to the Prime Minister on this, because one of the things I would like to see is that urban tenantries, that persons who live in urban tenantries have the right to buy the land at $250 a square foot. I am saying, Mr. Speaker, that when we look at, because I think all members of Parliament, all aspiring politicians must understand the implications of the 1937 regs and the Moyne Commission recommendation that in order to enfranchise black people, we had to give them some land. We have to give them the right to work, and OA is right. And I talked with the Prime Minister talked about giving recognition to heroes. OA deserves to be a hero, a national hero in this country, because he understood, Mr. Speaker, he understood the Moyne's recommendation that the black people at the time were writing because they had no work, they had no land, and the houses were poor, dilapidated. Bad conditions in the city, without garbage, no transportation. You can imagine this. When OA left in office, we were buying 50 buses a year. 50 buses a year, because we had money. 50 buses a year. Democratic Party came to office and didn't buy a single bus or single garbage truck. And we had money. He could not understand why. This great Barbadian, and I heard members talk about it. I believe he was the greatest thing, the greatest Prime Minister we had, who understood. He was not from any class. He was from the underprivileged. But he rose and he understood what it was to improve the lot of the people. He understood that. This was indeed a great man who never left out his friends. He told me on the road, I will always remember the road across Constant to St. George Secondary School, primary school and secondary. Once we make it, you will be with me. And that's why I quote today the story of Ruth and Naomi, because he said to me, wherever I am, I will take you. Very soon, I will leave this Parliament as well. Very soon. And it's just one of those things, Mr. Speaker. When I looked at his face in that casket that evening, I said, very soon, my time will come. My time will come. But we all must remember that we must stand guard on the philosophies and the principles that he stood by. You could not go into another cabinet, Mr. Speaker. You could not go into OER cabinet 15 minutes late. I remember one Monday, and I must tell this story. One Monday, I forgot that there was cabinet meeting. I I forgot that was cabinet meeting, and I was on my way to St. Philip. I had on a short pants in those days, and I was going someplace that he knew. But of course, he didn't want me to go on this day. He didn't know that I would not attend the cabinet meeting, but I forgot. So he called me and asked, Minister, where are you? I said, where am I? What it is, man? I on my way, I going in the east. He said, going what? The east? The cabinet meeting here. The cabinet meeting here. Skipper, where are you? I had to put off my friend and hurry back. And hurry back to the cabinet. Hurry home, put on a suit, and hurry back to the cabinet. When I got to the cabinet, I came in. I said, good evening to the Prime Minister. He said, come and sit down, Minister. And I just showed you the man. He was furious half an hour ago. But when he came in, he said, come in, Minister, and sat down. And civil servants who heard him 20 minutes ago was surprised. He said, the Prime Minister, he's treating this man very special. But that was the nature of the man. On another occasion, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that he liked men who were prepared. You cannot go into Oya cabinet and not prepared. You have to prepare. And I knew that he had an economic mind. So I always presented the cost-benefit analysis. And he always said to me, you are really smart, you know. Because as an economist, you have to give him the benefits, the cost-benefit analysis. And I would urge all ministers to understand you must give the benefit of how it can work. On that occasion, we were looking at the driver's license. And a Minister of Information in those days, Ms. Eastman, was presenting an ID card to replace the driver's license. We were trying to get the driver's license out to the public. And he was going with Minister Eastman. He said, I want a multi-purpose ID card. Minister, you have to show me. You have to show me how a driver's license today will benefit. And I presented my case, presented my argument, and then when it came to the final conclusion, I said, Mr. Prime Minister, this card is a revenue earning instrument that we will be able to charge fees every year and every 2 years or 3 years, as the case may be, for a driver's license. And these are the benefits of a driver's license. And that's the driver's license that you have in your pocket today. And he approved that after much argument. But you had to argue your case. And that was the man that we are paying tribute today. He kept his word over and over again. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that OA not only kept his word, but he was truthful to this country. And of course, not only this country, but also to the neighbors, the CARICOM neighbors. Prime Minister spoke up today about the single market and its economy. He wanted to see that more than ever take off, where there's a single market around CARICOM, and that people will be able to move freely to work, to play, as well as do other things. Mr. Speaker, we owe a great sense of gratitude to this man. By establishing the rural and urban commissions, Mr. Speaker, he wanted to see, to eliminate what we call economic dualism. Economic dualism is a term where some parts of the cities or the country is underdeveloped and some is developed. He wanted to see even development throughout the city. And one day he said to me, I can give you story upon story because he and I were friends, but we argue. He once said to me, I am going to develop St. Peter. I'm going to leave no turn unturbited. I said, okay, Prime Minister, okay, I didn't say anything. But he gave me the Ministry of Housing and Public Works, and I used them to the effectiveness of my constituency. He didn't have to tell me another time that he did not have to tell me, the Speaker, not to develop St. George. He developed St. Peter, and I developed St. George. And one time he came in St. George at an annual conference and said that I was batting on all fronts. And you know what? He said, Glenn Clark, you are batting real beautiful up here. I did not know you had the glebe, you had a police station. I said, Prime Minister, you didn't know these things? I'm Minister of Finance. He said, why you don't know these things? I said, well, Prime Minister, you remember what you telling me? You developed St. Peter, so I developed St. George too. He said, oh, I see. So he was pleased to see development. And that's what I believe I heard members mention today, that he will also allow you to do the work that you're supposed to do and do it effectively. Do it effectively. This was the nature of the man. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that we in the Barbados Labour Party, and I think he loved the Barbados Labour Party. And I must say, like members, because there's no secret to this, that both he and I, and some of the others who were born in the early 50s, believed that education was the way forward. We believe that when Errol Barr introduced the tenantries freehold, when he introduced free education, an extension of what Sir Grantley stood for, that we went with Errol Barr in those days. It was when Tom Allens came along that we both joined the Labour Party. He went with Burton Hines, and I went with Jack Hodel in St. George, and Nigel Barr in those days. And we always believed that the way forward was through education, as they said before. And that's why he, like me, when the Democratic Labour Party in between 2015 and 2017 brought a resolution here to abandon tertiary education, paying tuition fees, that we felt badly. That evening, we had to get up and speak. OA felt it was a bad and wrong thing to do, to abolish tertiary education, paying the tuition fees, because we saw what it did to poor people. And when the late, I don't know, the late member for Parliament for Christ, I think it was Christchurch East Central, Ron Jones came here, I felt it was the worst time, and I made this mention of this Sunday night, I might think, it was bad. He felt badly, and he gave a perspective. He said, let us fund tertiary education. I don't know how many of you were on the floor then. I guess the member for St. James South North was here. He said, we have to fund education. He believed, and he still believes up to his death, that we need to bring down, since the COVID took over, came. I spoke to him, and he felt that the government should use some of its resources, reserves, to help with the COVID situation, to create employment. He felt so. He said there was no need for us to have money sitting in the foreign banks or wherever it is, and people suffering. He wants to see creation of jobs, opportunity. And that's what his throne speech is speaking to. So in a way, the present Prime Minister is following the dictates or following the philosophy of our former leader. We understood, those of us who sat at his feet like Gamaliel, Mr. Speaker, those of us who sat at his feet realized that we could only do it when people are employed, when people are working. It stops social upheaval. We believe, like him, that we should stop poor people from being poor. Mr. Speaker, OA utilized the office of the Prime Minister in a magnanimous way. The office of the Prime Minister, he used, you can imagine, it was he who in 2007 bid for the World Cup. Have you ever heard this before? A small island state. Barbados still remains the smallest island to host the Cricket World Cup. Why he did it?
Finals.
Huh?
Finals.
The finals. World Cup finals. We had to relocate hundreds of people from Kensington. At the time, the member for St. Lucie, the former member for St. Lucie, was saying he want a facility in St. Lucie. OA said no. And the Democratic Labour Party did not support Kensington, the refurbishment of Kensington. They did not support it. But Owen said, no, we have to improve Kensington. And we were able to relocate hundreds of people from Pickwick Gap. And therefore, we had the World Cup. Splendid facility down there. And this is what he believed. He also believed that places like Nelson Street and the other depressed areas of St. Michael of city slums should be upgraded. That's why he supported the neighborhood upgrade program that we went for, that we fought for, the IADB Bank, that the Democratic Party threw out, because he believed that upgrading of tenantries, upgrading of inner cities were important. He wanted to see tenantry, the housing program, the national housing upgraded. And that's why he remembered something that he did while working at the Ministry of Finance. He used that facility, the facility called the Housing Credit Fund. Housing Credit Fund was his initiative while he was working at the Ministry of Finance. Tom Adams allowed him to go to Washington to do that, to improve that, to get that loan for us. And he used that to help upgrade housing stock across Barbados. And we can go on and on, Mr. Speaker, to speak about the work and the worth of this great soldier. And that's why I say today, that I am a disciple, an unrepentant disciple of OAA. Why? Because he has fight the fight, or he's fought the fight, and he has done his best. And I believe that wherever he is today, that he will be looking down on us saying, well done. If you follow our philosophy, then you will succeed. And we have to stay the course. We must understand, in order to be the best, you have to go through the hottest fire. And there's sometimes, and I make no apology to say this, there's sometimes your leader may say to you, you have to do this, and we do not like it. Sometimes we have to say to our children, you do not like to do your homework, but you must. You must stay the course in order for us to be the best we can be. So, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of myself, my family, constituency of St. George North, I want to say to his family, Julie, and the girls, and the grands, and the extended family, that you have in your late husband, father, relative, whatever, a man that you can be justly proud of. You must hold your head high, because we in the Barbados Labour Party will forever be grateful to the legacy of this man. We will ensure that his daughters and their relatives, that whatever we can do to help, we will, to ensure that they become the finest that they can be. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Member St. James Central.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to begin by saying that there are very few genuine friendships in politics, and I am privileged to be able to count among the friendships that I have had in my life, the one that I enjoyed with the late former Prime Minister. I heard the question asked earlier by an honorable member, I think it was the member St. Michael North, when he talked about the extent of the affection that the people of Barbados had for Owen. And you know, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is really summed up in a simple word: sincerity. Owen Arthur was a man who said what he meant, what he felt, and meant what he said and felt. And the people of Barbados picked that up very early and have never let go of the fact that this is the nature, and that was the nature of the man throughout all of his time of interaction with us. And Mr. Speaker, sir, me personally, I remember well, thank you, Cynthia. I remember well, one of the things that struck me about him was the time that he went to Parliament, and he made it abundantly clear that on the floor of Parliament, that he was going to confront the country with the hard truth that as a member of Parliament, and as a citizen of Barbados, he was being discriminated against because of the fact that he had a political allegiance. And therefore, there was people in this country who felt that because of his politics, Owen Arthur should find it hard to get a job. And I heard all sorts of people keeping noise and finding fault. He shouldn't say so. It make it look as though he's begging for something. In fact, there is a deceased former prime minister who, when he was leading the opposition, sought to make an issue of that. And not that I just said deceased former prime minister, because it betrayed a lack of intelligence on the part of that former prime minister. And what he failed to grasp was that when Arthur was using himself as an example of one of the major mischiefs in public life in Barbados at the time, and that still to some extent is perceived by people to exist today. And that is that because there's this partisan divide in the country, that there therefore must follow, as night follows day, a form of discrimination and exclusion, as though we are not all Barbadians together, and that we all should not be given an equal opportunity to contribute to the development of the land of our birth. These were real challenges of the time in which Owen Arthur lived. The vestiges of it, quite frankly, some still remain today, but to a much lesser extent. But it was that type of sincerity and courage of conviction, the willingness to confront the country and hold up a mirror image for it to look at itself and how it functioned, that people bought into. And that is what they liked about him, the absence of pretentiousness. He didn't have to pretend when he talking to be nobody else. He was Owen Arthur. And what Owen Arthur stood for, he stood for. Take it or leave it, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I think, quite frankly, that is also what gave birth to the philosophical position that he took about the politics of inclusion. And I perhaps am one of the most clear examples of that. But the reality is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that if we look at the society that we live in, and we're going to be serious about it, we all know that, especially in the context of combative electioneering, there is a divide that is created in this country. But when it is all said and done and the battle is lost and won, there needs to be a reunification of the country so that we can get about the business of governance and being good citizens. And you can't do that on a partisan political basis. Owen Arthur lived in a Jamaica where he saw it divide and destroy Jamaica, and to bring that economy virtually to its knees. And that was the larger and greater and more purposeful message that he wanted to send across to Barbadians. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, because of my close relationship with him, frankly, sir, from the time I came back, in fact, even before I went to university, it is difficult not to do what others have done and to stray down the anecdotal path of fond, sweet, sentimental, and sacchariferous memory. I think, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the memory of personal relationships has its place. But I do not know that a man who was of robust intellect like Owen Arthur was, disciplined in social scientific investigation as Owen Arthur was, a transformative political figure as Owen Arthur was. I do not know that that is the type of presentation that he would want to have made in this place at this time. Rather, sir, I suspect that the Owen Arthur I knew would have wanted us to reflect a little bit more on the philosophical commitment that he demonstrated to the social and economic transformation of this country and of some of the long-standing ills that afflicted Barbadian society, and that which he was born into, which he grew up confronting, challenges, sir, which he had as an individual to overcome in his early and formative stages, but which as Prime Minister he never forgot and had the courage, as I say, of his convictions to continue to fight against. The transformation, Mr. Speaker, sir, of some of the historical adversities affecting our society is what I suspect Owen Arthur would want us to be reflecting on at this time. The transformation, Mr. Speaker, of the historical basis for those adversities. And to that end, I adopt much of that which my friend, the Honourable Member for St. Michael East, has said in this House, because he's entirely right in the context of looking at what the society would have been if there had not been an intervention of a Prime Minister, Owen Arthur, at that time. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, let us be even more specific than we have been this evening, because Barbados was confronted with a form of bigotry. Let us call it what it was and see it for what it has been and to some extent still is. The Honourable Member spoke about cronyism. Mr. Speaker, sir, there are those people who Tom Adams would have described as the running dogs of politics, that they will find themselves aligned to a political party and, quite frankly, as high up the ladder in the chain as they perceive the political structure to be, so that they can feed off of the political process to the benefit of themselves and to the detriment of others who are out there in the society, who need to eat and live in Barbados too. And that has to be confronted. Equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, there is a bigotry of low expectation. Persons born to certain strata of this society back in the 1980s and 1970s, Mr. Speaker, sir, and before, were not expected to do certain things. I need not tell you that, Mr. Speaker, sir, because there are those who would tell you, quite frankly, when you were at age 10, that you were not expected to become leading lawyer in the community of Barbados. You know that. And the bigotry of low expectation has been inflicted on too many of our young people. Owen Arthur was one who came to confront that by using the office that he held as Prime Minister. And he said that there would have to be institutions created which help us to lift up the society and help people in certain sections of Barbadian society by virtue of the way in which their surroundings change and their surroundings transform. Give them the opportunity to see themselves in a different way and their relationship with the land of their birth in a more developmental and better way. And Mr. Speaker, so that is a social scientific construct being brought to bear on the day-to-day operations of a country. And let me be even more specific. I've heard it mentioned in here that there is the creation of a Rural and Urban Development Commission. That is true. But the larger issue is not that there was the creation of these things, but what was the purpose behind them? What was the intent behind them? What was the transformational policy that was to be delivered to the people, Mr. Speaker, sir? It was to confront directly the bigotry of low expectation in working class communities in urban and rural Barbados. And Mr. Speaker, sir, let me give you 5 examples of what Owen Arthur was focused on. He grew up in rural Barbados, as we all know, and knew what it was to have communities, entire communities, without electrification. That ain't a light, in other words, let me not use fancy language, there ain't a light out by me. That the children learn their lessons by smut lamp when the night come, Mr. Speaker. Huh? And that there is a difference in that household to the household where there is light, that you can hit a switch. And very often the social stratification was such that there ain't a mommy and daddy inside the house when the night come that the children go do lessons, neither. Because there's a different family construct. And that had to be dealt with. And in my constituency, which is not entirely rural, part of it is very urban. But Mr. Speaker, sir, straddling urban and rural as it does, I can tell you that even today in 2020, not in 1999 and 94 when Owen Arthur was Prime Minister, but today in 2020, one of the issues that we still got to deal with is getting proper electricity across the constituency. And that is perhaps in the context now more so about making sure that lighting the pathway to your home is corrected. But we were talking back then about light in your house. And Mr. Speaker, let us also understand, and this is the second thing that the urban and rural commissions were created to confront, the challenge of landlocked houses in Barbados. And again, I'm using nice language, but let me explain it and make it more straightforward. When Owen he wants to stop poor people from being poor, what was the reality of that? The reality of that, Mr. Speaker, was that when you have a community where there is no road, but you got a house that is planted there, and the neighbor tell you that he put some paling and you can't walk past him, the body over across to the other side where you would normally get an entrance from, you and them follow 2-3 years ago, so you can't even think about passing that way. Mr. Speaker, you get stranded in the middle of nowhere. You go, man, you know, but you go beg for ease to get to where you want to go when the day comes. You see this in your constituency, sir, because I see it in mine. Even today in 2020, that still exists. And it has to be wrestled to the ground. It is a vestige of a post-colonial underdevelopment in our society, where people who sat in cushioned comfort in town planning in the post-colonial days did not feel that working class people's plight was something that mattered that much. Another battle we got to fight against, because there is still a vestige of that neo-colonial thinking in the structures of Barbadian governance. Mr. Speaker, sir, therefore, what is the day-to-day reality that those people confront? It means that if you get sick in your house, the ambulance can't come to get at you. And you got to hope that the same neighbor who didn't speak to you for 2 years will be helpful enough to come and help pick you up to carry you out to the ambulance, instead of left you there to dead. Mr. Speaker, sir, it means that if your house catches a fire, as has happened in my constituency because of landlocked houses, the fire truck goes so far and no further. And if it can't get the hoses to reach, you stand up and watch it burn to the ground. That's your little investment, sir. And at the base of the Society for Working Class Barbadian People, Owen Arthur understood that those people buy but one house in their lifetime. It ain't like some that got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 properties about the place here and some investments overseas as well. And if you're talking about members of the former administration, you might got to count a little higher. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that is what he was trying to confront and to correct. The other thing that had to be corrected is the absence of running water to people's homes. And again, sir, the vestiges of it continues. And you find that there is still a challenge in urban and rural Barbados to deal and to correct the problem, deal with and correct the problem of outdoor toilet facilities, toilet facilities. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is a degrading thing. It is a degrading thing in 2020 for people to have to be relieving themselves in exactly the same way that their ancestors did in 1920. But if you're going to sit in the office of Prime Minister and not realize that you've got to make a conscious effort to intervene, and you can't solve all of the problems in one term or in 2 terms, or in 3 terms. And quite frankly, sir, we began urban and rural decades ago, and we still haven't stamped it all out yet. But it had to be confronted, and that was the magic of the man. That was the magic of his ability to say to Barbadians candidly, I want to stop poor people from being poor. But you have then to go down and drill down a little bit more to understand and to unravel the social scientific intent behind that which the policy was intended to achieve. So honorable member for St. Michael East is 100% correct. I am not going to get bogged down in any debate about the great man theses of history as to whether Barrowism or Arthurism was the better prescription for Barbados, or who was the better prime minister. That is for the historians to decide after collating the evidence, the passage of time. I lived, and I am privileged to have lived in the era of both Barrow and Arthur. I am privileged to have known one of them very well. I only hear about the other one, too young. But the truth of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that is too hard to work out when a man heart genuine. And I think that both of them had a genuine heart. And that is why the people of Barbados have latched on to them and their memory and hold it. There's another man who people clamored behind. Nobody don't even talk about him now. They may talk about $3.33 million, but they don't talk about him because they saw no sincerity, Mr. Speaker, sir. There's another man who left about here the other day, and nobody don't talk about, see, hear, think about at all, other than in moments of pain when we said, well, who would it do to bring us to this stage? And Mr. Speaker, sir, that is what made Owen Arthur a transformational figure in my estimation. Now, I heard the honorable member for St. George North speak passingly about community resource centers. Again, we have to do our best to allow the records of this house, which will be read by people in future times, and hopefully better times, help them to understand the passage that we went through to get here and to get down the road where those people will be when they read it. Mr. Speaker, sir, there was a time when Arthur was Prime Minister, he came and found and had to confront and correct a digital divide in this country. That there were those who had and those who had not. It still plagues us to some extent today, and it has, like most things, been laid bare, absolutely naked, by COVID-19. So the honorable leader of government business right now, sitting in her capacity as education minister, has to preside over an education structure, Mr. Speaker, sir, where you want to use G Suite platforms, etc., to make sure that our children can get the benefit of education, because you can't have all of them in the school at the same time in this COVID-19 environment. But Mr. Speaker, sir, the reality is that there are families that don't have no Wi-Fi in at them. There are families, Mr. Speaker, sir, with electrification problems at them, far less Wi-Fi. There are families, Mr. Speaker, sir, where if there's a computer in the house, that's a luxury. How do 4 little children use one computer for school? These are the issues that have been laid bare. This is not just something that happened today, however. It finds its genesis back at the immediately post-colonial period. But Mr. Speaker, sir, what we needed and needed badly were leaders who were prepared to intervene in the way that Owen Arthur was prepared to intervene. And that is why things like the Community Resource Center was very important, because the digital divide, not only here in Barbados, but the digital divide between us in Barbados and those of us on the rest of the world. Because you cannot, Mr. Speaker, sir, produce any serious economic upturn. You can't export, you can't develop your services sectors, you can't develop, Mr. Speaker, as an economy and as a country unless you're a part of the information technology era. So that was an investment in making sure that our people rural and urban Barbadian poor, working class, black-skinned people were able to get an understanding, a toehold. And to this day, Mr. Speaker, sir, the digital divide continues to haunt the people of Barbados. And it is a challenge that we have to wrestle with robustly. That is why, for the first time ever in history, we have now an education ministry that is into teaching people about robotics and coding. And when I talked about this on a platform 2 years ago in a general election, I remember a young man saying to me, but Mr. Simmons, what you talk about sound good. Well, I would like to learn to do that. And he's about 18 years old. But you know, the sad thing is that there are little children in China at primary school level that doing it at age 4. In Europe, there are little children at primary school level that doing it at age 4 and 5. And that is why this is the struggle that we have. We don't lightly talk about losing 10 years, Mr. Speaker, sir. We lost a decade of development. And part of what Owen Arthur was, he was ahead of his time because he was confronting a digital divide that threatened the country's development then. And as technology does not stand stagnant, it continues to change every single day. It continues to be a challenge for us now. Mr. Speaker, sir, I can only say to you that again, part of what he represented in my judgment and the eyes of the people of this country was a leader who, much like Tom Adams, and frankly in the vein of all good Labour Party leaders, because the current Prime Minister is demonstrating her own capacity in this regard, able to look at the financial infrastructure of the country and make a demonstration, a conscientious analysis and demonstration of whether it is fit for a purpose. The financial infrastructure and architecture of Barbados when Owen Arthur became Prime Minister was not fit for a purpose. And he confronted that. So I'm not going to just stand here and say, oh, he was a good economist and he had good training. It went beyond that. He utilized those skills, Mr. Speaker, sir, to make sure that the architecture was fit for purpose. Hence the creation of an Enterprise Growth Fund Limited. Hence the creation, Mr. Speaker, sir, of a fund access. Hence the understanding, Mr. Speaker, of removing some of the constraints that small entrepreneurs and micro entrepreneurs have as they try, sir, to find the financial wherewithal to get about the business interests that they have. That era of introducing the Enterprise Growth Fund, Mr. Speaker, when I go back down memory lane, there are countless small hotels in Barbados that benefited from that fund, where people were able to retrofit and equip hotels, retrofit and equip catering and culinary businesses. Mr. Speaker, sir, in order to make sure that the commercial activity of this country, and more importantly, in order to diversify the base of commercial activity in this country so that black Barbadians were able to achieve high levels, sir, of commercial activity when before the door was closed to them. So it was a democratization of finance and access to finance, sir, that Owen Arthur represented. And I want to go further, Mr. Speaker, sir. He also understood the need for us to build resilience across the economy. And one of the things that we must not lose track of or sight of is the fact that it was his government, and I came into cabinet for the first time in 2003, Mr. Speaker, sir. And the Minister of Commerce then would have been working on an e-commerce strategy for the country. And let me explain to you the significance of that. That's 2003, this is 17 years later. When we first rolled out that e-commerce strategy, Mr. Speaker, sir, there was actually a supermarket in Barbados that started to go online and allow people to put in orders. I believe that process died a natural death shortly after the government changed. I'm not going to say it died because government changed, because part of the concern really is this point I'm coming to. We were ahead, and Owen Arthur was ahead of his time. Vision, sir, means that you got to lead from in front and you got to take your people with you. The Barbadian community, Mr. Speaker, sir, also had access in 2004, 5, 6 to certain financial institutions, allowing you to do your financial business with them online. It was fledgling, but nobody was ready for it yet. Our people, sir, and one of the things that I know as Minister of Commerce must confront is the need for us to do the necessary financial literacy work in every community of this country, because our people must be comfortable with financial opportunity. And Mr. Speaker, sir, one of the things that COVID has laid bare, and we see now Owen Arthur's vision. We have an e-commerce strategy rollout in Barbados in 2004. But in 2020, when we had COVID and an economy shut down, we had major restaurants in this country that had to shut down because they had no platform to do business by way of e-commerce. 17 years later, the business community had not caught up with the leader of the land back in 2003. 17 years later, some of our consumers have not caught up with where the leader of the land was in 2003. So that, Mr. Speaker, that is why I do not buy into the great man theses, because it has to be about a whole community coming to a common understanding as a result of being trained. Because I don't care how bright you are or how visionary you are, in the end of the day, we got to lift everybody up with a common tide, a tide that will raise all ships, sir. And Mr. Speaker, the other thing that we have to look at his contribution, or look at by way of his contribution, is the modernization of the Barbadian economy. To my right, sitting immediately behind me, is the former Minister of Commerce. And it is that honorable member for St. Michael North who would have presided over the Fair Trade Commission legislation and the consumer protection legislation. And Mr. Speaker, sir, let me say to you candidly that there are countries in the Caribbean that ain't got no Fair Trade Commission yet. No consumer protection legislation yet. Again, we are far ahead, sir. And part of that reality is, and I remember sitting in cabinet with Owen, and he making the point, you can't build a modern economy if you are not empowering your consumers. You can't build a modern economy if you're not building into it fairness in terms of the way in which businesses operate, how monopolies operate, and how monopolies are treated and monopolistic practices are curbed and democratization in the economy is encouraged. That is what Owen Arthur lived and breathed and believed in, sir. And allow me to say, it is reflected even today, the urgency of the issues, because while we had to break a monopoly with cable and wireless, and we have all heard that cable and wireless said that they enjoyed a standard of quality of life of the consumers in Barbados that was second to none that they could find anywhere else where there was a cable and wireless. Best returns on investment was Barbados. We are now in the process of unbundling and democratizing the provision of current, light, electricity, and breaking a monopoly with the light and power. And part of the whole vision has to be, or was, about taking this economy and, as I said, democratizing it and placing at the disposal of every Barbadian family an opportunity to be able to, in the context of what was cable and wireless before, you needed to have mass access to the airwaves. And in the context of light and power, you need to have mass access to the ability to produce current and drive down costs. And when you're able to drive the costs down, you're then able to broaden your base and get into things like manufacturing. There was a time when we had a manufacturing industry. It died, and it died largely because of the fact that the cost of energy was just too high for us to be treated as being competitive. And Mr. Speaker, sir, again, I don't know how much has been said before. Since I've been in here, I've heard nothing about it, and it would be remiss of me not to speak to it, because I think it is in this regard that Owen Arthur was perhaps more stellar, and I know for sure, without any fear of contradiction, that his reputation was cemented across the region in the area of his leadership of this region in international trade-related matters. Mr. Speaker, sir, the period that he spent in his capacity as lead prime minister for the creation of the single market and economy has been second to none. It was a personal pleasure for me to be able to enter cabinet, be given the responsibility at ministerial level for working in that particular area. Mr. Speaker, I can honestly say that sometimes sitting with him late hours into the night, talking early hours into the morning on the phone, it was like doing a master's course. Reality is, though, that what we had to show for it was the creation of a Caribbean single market and economy. As the Honourable Member for St. Michael E. said, you can't gainsay these things because the evidence is there for you to see. And we were in 4 theaters of negotiation all at one time. Free Trade Area of the Americas, World Trade Organization, Caribbean Single Market and Economy, and then, Mr. Speaker, sir, we were doing bilaterals with several other countries in the hemisphere. We have those trade agreements with the countries in the hemisphere, many of them. We have, Mr. Speaker, sir, through no fault of our own, America and Brazil fight up over the Free Trade Area of Americas and collapse the whole thing. That ain't had nothing to do with little Barbados, but we were in there punching and kicking as usual. And, Mr. Speaker, sir, the fact of the matter is we are represented at high level and with excellence at the World Trade Organization. But the point that must not escape us, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that there are benefits that are being discussed even today that the visionaries back then, and the truth is, let us recognize that while we're talking about Prime Minister Arthur, he sat in the company of a pantheon of Caribbean heroes. Back then, there was a Prime Minister in Jamaica, P.J. Patterson. Again, a dean in terms of quality of public service and contribution across this region. Mr. Speaker, sir, intellectuals that attended and participated in the meetings, Professor Norman Girvan, Professor George Beckford, Professor Ben, these people, Mr. Speaker, sir, gave of their, not just their time and talent, but their heartfelt energies towards building out this region's single market and single economy. And initiatives like the Jagdeo Initiative, which would have seen Guyana being a place which was utilized for its abundance of land, for all of us to be able to access, and we have farmers who do their business from in Guyana, Barbadian farmers being able to access Guyana and grow their things there. And then, Mr. Speaker, sir, using the manufacturing base in Trinidad for you to do the value added to the product. And then, Mr. Speaker, sir, using the marketing skills and qualified people here in Barbados for us to be able to penetrate the international community. That was the dream. But you know, Mr. Speaker, all of that time that has passed, 2007, Owen Arthur would have left government. We're in 2020, 13 years later. You know, right back to where we began. So that today, the government of Barbados has to be in dialogue with Guyana and with Suriname about some of the same issues that we had been determining and had settled back then. That is the difference between leadership in a proactive way and leadership as in just sitting in a chair, Mr. Speaker, sir. So our Prime Minister now is in talks with Suriname. Our Prime Minister in talks with Guyana about issues that had been settled in 2004 and 2005, Mr. Speaker. And the type of arrangements which would be symbiotic and complementary, assisting this region to be able to penetrate international markets, we have made little or no headway. But you can't fault the vision. And so I say, quite frankly, sir, that I think that one of the things that we have to do is to recognize the contribution that the late professor has made to this country in a tangible and analytical way. I perhaps, Mr. Speaker, sir, should not sit down without reflecting again on something that has allowed us to set ourselves apart from the rest of the Eastern Caribbean. And we take it for granted. You know that there would be no home porting in Barbados if it wasn't for Wayne Arthur. But the home porting business prior to COVID was a robust part and a major part of our tourism sector. And Mr. Speaker, sir, let us be frank. A ship passes through the Caribbean and stops at many places. People get off the ship and they do a tour inland. That is when they come for the first time, come face to face with the magic of the little island that is called Barbados. They fall in love with the people, the culture, our ease, our rhythm of life, and the beauty of the place. Mr. Speaker, sir, that then turns itself. Yes, that then turns itself into a long-stay visitor because he or she won't come back and spend a little bit more time. And very often it turns itself into an investor because he or she come back, fall in love with the country, want to buy a piece of land and build a house and have a property here, etc., etc. That has happened over and over again. And that has nothing to do with the obvious business interest of provisioning ships and people having to stay post-cruise and pre-cruise and hotels and eat food at our restaurants, etc., etc. So it generated a whole new avenue of business opportunity. And Mr. Speaker, sir, it did not exist before Prime Minister Arthur. It did not. So let us understand that we are talking about fundamental transformative changes in this economy. And I want to say, sir, that even as I close, and without having gone to the point of national consciousness, which I wanted to touch, because the whole thing about Heroes Day is another story all by itself. And again, because of his leadership. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are talking about a truly giant figure. He may have been small and petite in stature, but he bestrode the world like a colossus, and we as petty men had to peek between his huge legs. And that is a reality, sir. Borrowed out of Shakespeare, but it applied here in Barbados. Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to personally offer my sincere condolences from this place. I have offered them personally, but I want to offer them to Julie, his wife, Sabrina and Leah. I want to also say that take courage. He loved you all dearly. He spoke of his daughters with an affection. I am privileged to have a daughter of my own. And I learned from him, and he prepared me for the kind of unparalleled affection that a father has for a daughter. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to say that on behalf of my own family and my constituency as a whole, I offer my condolences.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 5 minutes to 6.
The question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until 5:55 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 5:55 p.m.